50, 51, 52. Oh, hello there. Right, today, anatomy. What should we talk about today? I know, let's talk about the abdominal wall, right, between back and stuff. Right. What I really want to talk about is the inguinal canal, because it's something that students often get caught up on. But to talk about the inguinal canal, do you know where the inguinal canal is? Inguinal, groin area, right? So we're down here, you know about the inguinal ligament, right? Anyway, my point is, I want to talk about the inguinal canal, but to talk about the inguinal canal, first of all, I have to cover a whole bunch of other structures here, right? So we'll talk about a whole bunch of other structures, and then we'll talk about how those structures form the inguinal canal, all right? Good. So, what is the inguinal canal? Why do we care about the inguinal canal? What goes through the inguinal canal? It's a canal, stuff's going to go through it. And what forms, did I say what forms the inguinal canal? What forms the inguinal canal? So the inguinal canal, I think we think about most in the male anatomy, in the male pelvis, because we have these things outside the body. The testis is inside the scrotum, and they communicate with things inside the abdominopelvic cavity, right? So the vas deferens has got to get in, the testicular artery's got to get in, and the testicular vein or the pampiniform plexus has got to get out, and nerves have got to get, right? And the scrotum is an outpouching of the anterior abdominal wall. So if you look at the scrotum, it's got lots of layers. It's got skin, it's got muscle, it's got fascia, it's got all those layers, and those layers mimic the layers of the anterior abdominal wall, and the reason is because it's an outpouching, right? And the testes, both sets of gonads, in the male and the female, they start to develop in the abdomen, and then they descend to their final positions. The ovaries obviously don't have to travel quite so far, they just travel into the pelvis, whereas the testes have to travel further. They have to travel out through the abdominal wall and down here. So they take a covering of those layers with them, and this is the spermatic cord. So the spermatic cord is going through the inguinal canal. In the female pelvis, well, there's an embryological structure, which I've probably mentioned before. It's a great word. It's the gubernaculum, and the gubernaculum, from I think the Greek word meaning rudder, the gubernaculum guides the descent of the gonads to their final positions, which means that the other end is anchored to what are initially the labioscrotal swellings, which become the labia in the female and the scrotum in the male. So the gubernaculum guides the descent of the gonads, so it pulls the testes all the way into the scrotum, which then forms. It only pulls the ovaries so far, but it means that the gubernaculum still exists in the adult, and it's the round ligament. So the round ligament of the uterus also passes out through the inguinal canal and to the labia outside the pelvis. So the inguinal canal is larger in the male because of the spermatic cord passing through it and all the things in the spermatic cord, but it does also exist in the female anatomy, and it has the round ligament passing through it. This means that it's more susceptible to injury in the male than the female, but the anatomy is similar. Right then, where do we find the inguinal canal? Now, you know about the inguinal ligament. So inguinal comes from the Latin word inguine, meaning groin. The inguinal ligament we keep talking about, it comes up when we're talking about the femur, when we're talking about the hip, when we're talking about the femoral artery, when we're talking about the femoral triangle. So the inguinal ligament runs between the anterior superior iliac spine at the end of the iliac crest, right? This is the pelvis here. You can palpate this. It runs from the anterior superior iliac spine down to the pubis, the bony pubis down here. And the inguinal ligament is then the boundary between this abdominal wall and the thigh. Where does the inguinal ligament come from? Why does it exist? So the inguinal ligament marks the location of the inguinal canal, and the inguinal canal appears, it starts about halfway along the inguinal ligament, which is also where we see the femoral artery and vein passing deep to the inguinal ligament, and then it runs across here medially. Right, here's your pelvis, here's the inguinal ligament, this is the ilium, the iliac crest, the anterior superior iliac spine, this bony part here is the pubis, and up here is the pubic tubercle. See that lumpy bit? So the inguinal ligament then is running between the pubic tubercle and the anterior superior iliac spine. Now, where does the inguinal ligament come from? Is it just a ligament, or is it more interesting than that? It's more interesting than that. The inguinal canal then is running through here, and somehow it allows structures to pass through that abdominal wall to get outside of the body, outside the abdominopelvic cavity and back in again. So somehow we've created a canal here, but how do we create that canal? Where does it come from? And the canal then, it has what we call a deep inguinal ring, and so a deep or internal ring, and it has a superficial or external ring. So the deep ring is on the inside here, and the superficial ring is on the outside here. And we have this canal there, and we can see a little bit of that. So that would be the superficial ring there. How do we make this inguinal canal then? Right, well, now we need to start talking about some of these muscles. So as I was doing my sit-ups, you know, I would have been working this muscle here. This is the six-pack, isn't it? This is rectus abdominis. And now rectus abdominis is split in the midline by this linea alba. And this linea alba is a string of connective tissue running between the xiphoid process here and the pubic symphysis down here. The pubic symphysis there. And we have three other muscles that we're interested in. So when you're doing your twists and your side crunches and that sort of thing, you're also, oh look, we can see different layers of muscles on different sides. So can you see how we've got these fibres running in this direction here, what we tend to call hands in pockets direction. And this is the external layer of muscles. This is the external oblique muscles. This is a flat sheet of muscle forming part of the lateral and anterior abdominal wall. Now if I'm really skinny, you can, which I don't think I am at the moment, but you can see the slips of muscle appearing when I rotate, right? Right, so anyway, down there somewhere. So the external oblique muscle passes from ribs 5 to 12 down towards, look, there's the iliac crest down here and down to that pubic tubercle. So the iliac crest and the pubic tubercle, and here's a clue, look what's in between the iliac crest and the pubic tubercle. I wonder if the external oblique muscle has anything to do with the inguinal ligament. And then it also runs to the linea alba. So that's the outermost layer of muscle fibres, and they're running in that direction. Now look, if we take away the external oblique muscle, we see these fibres here, look, these are running in the opposite direction, like this. So this is the internal oblique muscle layer, and these fibres are running from, look, the iliac crest, they're running from connective tissues under the inguinal ligament. There's a whole bunch of other layers of fascia there, which maybe we'll talk about one day just for fun. And then running up to the 10th to 12th ribs under here. This is also running across to the linea alba. It's also attached to the thoracolumbar fascia, which is a number of layers of thick connective tissue holding everything in place around here. Thoracolumbar fascia, it's a general sheet of fascia around here. And it's also passing to the conjoint tendon. Now the conjoint tendon kind of comprises this muscle and the other muscle layer deep to it. And they kind of come together and form a tendon which inserts down here, down into the pubic symphysis. So the other muscle then, if you take this away, you'd have transversus abdominis. And transversus abdominis does as the name suggests, and it runs transversely around the abdomen. So that's the deepest layer. So we've got three muscle layers: external oblique, internal oblique, and transversus abdominis. if I get another model, I can use that without having to take this one apart. This one's not so heavy. Now look, can you see? So we've taken away the anterior abdominal wall, and look, you can see these three layers of muscle here, right? External oblique, internal oblique, and transversus abdominis, and also down here. Now. It's interesting actually, because we've got these three layers of muscle in the abdominal wall, and they mirror the three layers of muscle that we see up in the thorax with the intercostal muscles, right? We've got external, internal, and innermost intercostal muscle layers. Cool, huh? We are segmented animals. We are built to a pattern. Now the other interesting thing is, which you can kind of see here, is that these are flat sheets of muscle, which are forming, their main job is to hold everything in place, right? But these are three sheets of muscle, and then as they run around the abdomen, as they run around anteriorly, they change, they become aponeuroses. Do you remember an aponeurosis? An aponeurosis is normally, say, a long muscle will give a long tendon, and that'll insert into a bone, so that's your tendon. And aponeurosis is where a flat muscle becomes a flat sheet of tendon. That's an aponeurosis. So we have these. And this is what we're seeing here, right, in white, is that we're seeing the external and internal oblique muscles and transversus abdominis. They're ending as muscles and becoming tendinous aponeurosis and passing over and under rectus abdominis and inserting into the linea alba. So we've got layers of muscle working together, fibres running in different directions, holding the abdominal contents in place. So that's a pretty tough wall. How do we get structures through that wall and out into the scrotum? So the functions of these muscles then are, as I was doing when I was led down, it's lateral flexion of the trunk and rotation of the trunk and flexion of the trunk and those things. So when we were talking about the muscles at the back and I was talking about those movements of the vertebral column, these guys are doing most of the work. The little muscles are doing much more proprioceptive stuff, right? Okay, so we've got these lovely layers of muscle. They can also raise intrathoracic and intra-abdominal pressure and that sort of thing. And we'll come back to that in a moment. So, when you're lifting something heavy, you hold your breath and so you're kind of, you're forming this pressure bag which supports your lumbar and everything else when you're lifting something heavy. So these guys are really important. It's important you keep them strong and balanced with your back. Let's add another layer to our three layers of muscle. So think inside the abdomen here, all of this is covered by peritoneum, right? Because the contents of the abdominal cavity are generally within the greater sac. So there's a layer of peritoneum over here, and then we have maybe a bit more fascia and stuff, but then we have our three layers of muscle over the top. So we might call the layer of connective tissue that we're interested in today, between the peritoneum and between transversus abdominis, we could call it the transversalis fascia, or the transverse fascia. It gets called both. So we've got our transversalis fascia, we've got three layers of muscle, we've got a good strong abdominal wall keeping all of our GI tract inside. So how on earth, this is today's question, how on earth do we get the ductus deferens and the blood vessels and stuff out to the testis and the scrotum? Well, you can go, you're done. So you've probably been reading your textbook and you've read that the inguinal canal has got a floor made out of these things, and it's got a roof made out of these things, and it's got a wall, an anterior wall made out of those things, and a posterior wall made out of those things, and you're struggling to work out what the heck's going on in your head. It's actually very, very simple. Right, we've got our three layers of muscle, right? Now, what happens with those three layers of muscle to form this canal? It must be incredibly complicated, right? Well, as the external oblique muscle runs down, and as I was hinting at, attaches to the iliac crest and attaches to the pubic tubercle, well, what happens when it gets down here is that this muscle can't just join to the bone all the way along here, because then it would close off so that the sheets of muscle and bone would then close off this from the femur. And we know that's not going to work because we need to send a femoral artery and a femoral vein and a femoral nerve and all sorts of other goodies down into the lower limb, right? So the lower limb works. So if we cut that off, if we just take our external oblique muscle and stick it to the bone, no good. We've got this little hole here for the obturator nerve, but it's not going to work. So what happens is that, I'm just going to get one sheet of paper. This is external oblique. As the external oblique muscle gets down to the iliac crest and the pubic tubercle, it just loops around a little bit, right? It just whoop, forms a little bit of a curve, and that's where the inguinal ligament comes from. So the inguinal ligament is the aponeurosis, the flat tendinous sheet of the external oblique muscle as it's attaching to the bony points, curling around. And look, as it curls around, at the bottom there, that's it. You've got your canal, haven't you? External oblique muscle comes down, attaches, and loops around, and that's your canal. That there, this here, that's your superficial inguinal ring. We haven't completely made our canal yet, right? We've only made part of it. But all we need really to finish it off is this is the transversalis fascia, right? So that's covering the peritoneum and lining the cavity. And then this comes down. So that's it. You've got your pink transversalis fascia, you've got your green external oblique muscle, the external oblique muscle curls around, and that's it. You've made a canal. All right, does that make sense? So that's really all the inguinal canal is, right? You've got layers of muscle and fascia, and the external oblique muscle, it needs to attach down here, but it needs to leave a gap so that vessels and nerves can get into the lower limb, and it does that by its aponeurosis attaching and stretching itself across these bony points and attaching as the inguinal ligament, and it curls around. And by doing that, you get a partial canal, and the rest of the canal is basically made by the transversalis fascia. All the other muscles, the internal oblique and transversus abdominis, they're also aponeurotic. Their tendons are also attaching around here, but they're just making a gap, really, for the superficial ring to open through. The other muscles attach here, and you might read about this making this part of this wall and this making this part of the roof, and that's like, but the point, that's not the point. The basic concept is external oblique, whoop, curls around. You've got your transversalis fascia and your external oblique curling around, and they meet, and that's the inguinal canal. Okay then, here's our spermatic cord passing through the inguinal canal. Does this mean then that there must be a hole in our transversalis fascia for that to work? No, because remember I said that the scrotum is an outpouching of the layers of the anterior abdominal wall. So the transversalis fascia doesn't have a hole in it. No, it's an outpouching. It's lining the inguinal canal, right? And that layer is passing through the inguinal canal out towards the scrotum. So there isn't a hole. There is a hole here. There isn't really a hole. There is a hole, but there isn't a hole. The transversalis fascia doesn't end as a hole. It's an outpouching like the rest of the scrotum. Cool, huh? So yes, there is a weakness at the deep inguinal ring, but anything that goes through that weakness is going to go through the inguinal canal and potentially into the scrotum. But don't forget that this inguinal canal then is formed by that layer of muscle, that external oblique muscle, and there are other muscles attaching to this region, which means that we're talking about hernias now, right? When you're most likely to herniate, when you're most likely to pass abdominal contents, say a loop of bowel through a weakness, that's when your abdomen's under high pressure. Now, because the inguinal canal is covered with these aponeuroses and muscles, that means that when you increase your abdominal pressure, it's these muscles that are contracting. right? The layers of muscles of the external abdominal wall. So as they contract, they're closing the inguinal canal. So they're protecting the inguinal canal from hernia. How clever is that? Isn't that neat? So normally, nothing should pass into the inguinal canal that's not already there, that's not supposed to be there. The spermatic cord or the round ligament of the uterus, something like that. However, of course, we do see herniations here, don't we? So we see, this would be an inguinal hernia, where essentially the inguinal region here is affected. And we have a direct inguinal hernia and an indirect inguinal hernia. So an indirect inguinal hernia is when something, say a loop of small bowel, passes into the deep inguinal ring and starts to pass through the inguinal canal. And if it keeps going, it could end up within the scrotum. This is bad because the bowel can get twisted, volvulus, it can become ischemic, its blood supply can get cut off and all sorts of things. If that happens, massive pain, really, really bad stuff, you know. So herniation of the bowel is uncool. But a direct inguinal hernia then, that's a weakness in this region, but it's not a weakness of the inguinal canal. It's going to be a weakness of the wall itself. So a weakness in the transversalis fascia or something similar, allowing a direct protrusion of bowel through the wall itself, not through the inguinal canal. So an indirect inguinal hernia passes into the inguinal canal, so it's got to pass through the deep ring to do that. A direct inguinal hernia passes directly through the abdominal wall. Forget about the inguinal canal, right? Okay, cool. And of course, a femoral hernia goes under the gap there underneath the inguinal ring. I'm not going to list all the structures that form the walls and the roof and of the inguinal canal because the textbooks labour that, and it's good. It's, you know, it's good, accurate stuff. But I don't think it helps with the important concept of what the inguinal canal is. External oblique. All right. I hope that was helpful. I hope I explained it clearly. It's a challenging one, the inguinal canal. It's a challenging one. While the muscles of the abdominal wall are not too challenging, that bit, how they form the inguinal canal is. But don't go into too much detail, just whoop, and you're good. All right, cool. See you next week.